What's up? Tory, aka Splatter, here, and I'm here to do an instant breakdown of the Istanbul Regional, the first event in the official first season. Now that we're done with week 0. So I'm going to do kind of a breakdown from a strategy perspective of this event, in particular focusing on these finals matches, but I'm going to kind of let you know ahead of time I don't really think that the strategy going on here is super deep, and neither does it need to be. So we're not going to be getting into a ton of strategic depth in this video because I don't think there's just a ton to talk about here per se. And we'll get to why that's the case in a minute. So if you're looking for like an hour and a half breakdown of strategy over the course of this entire event, this video is not going to be that. This is going to be kind of a boots on the ground reality. This is what we're looking at for this event, and we might see other events that look like this as well. So with that out of the way, let's talk about this event as a whole, right? Obviously, I have Finals 1 pulled up because I think that's where things start to get really interesting. But part of the reason why I don't think this video is going to be that long is because of dominance. Specifically, Overcharge 9483's dominance over pretty much the entire event. You look at their OPR, and obviously OPR is not going to be perfect. This OPR is in the 300s. Every other robot at this event had an OPR of 120 or generally less. They were around 3 times as offensively productive as any other machine showing up here. They are that good. And this isn't a knock on the rest of this event. You know, all the top teams outside of 9483 are great in their own right. And you know, they were really solid here, and they'll grow over the course of a season to, continue putting up even stronger offensive output as we get more time to tune their machines. But 9483 played like a top 10, top 15 robot in the world right now. And that was just a level of offensive output that other teams could not match. So if you look at what 9483 was able to put up over the course of this event, pretty much every single score in like the 300s and 400s had them involved in it. You know, you look at these scores they were able to put up, and they didn't really see a close match until they wind up rocking into Finals 2, and they have some mechanical challenges on their alliance that made that match close. But outside of that, they were able to kind of run over this event. So, looking at kind of the teams that we see here in this Finals Match 1, obviously we have Overcharge right here, 9483, and they built a Spindexer with a large hopper, so bump only, and single turret, right? 6436, who is currently over here, you can't really easily see them, but you can kind of see them in this shot down here. I believe they are a trench bot with a turret. You have Team Rembrandt's, famous team out of the Netherlands. They're over here. They have a trench bot with a turret. And then you have 9029, NF. I think they're over here somewhere. They have, I believe, a fixed angle shooter or a fixed direction shooter that goes under the bump. So we have some diversity in the robots making it to this point in the event. But, generally speaking, you're looking at turrets, right? The 2 robots here on Alliance 1, their turrets. Team Rembrandt's, I believe statistically they are, if I go into insights here, I believe they're the 3rd top scoring robot of this event. Yeah, they are. They're a turret. The 9029, they did really well with a fixed direction shooter. But the moral of the story is that turrets wound up doing very well in this event. And 9483 managed to put up an incredible offensive performance with just 1 turret. So 1 turret. Ugh. I can't spell. It's too early in the morning for me. But essentially, what this kind of goes to show is that turrets have no problem outputting enough offensive production and putting through the balls per second necessary to do really well at events. And perhaps more interestingly, you can seed really highly and do quite well even if you don't go under the trench. right? At least in these early events, teams have not had to go into a trench in order to seed first and do really well during elims. Do I think that this would necessarily be reflective of what happens in even week 2? Not necessarily. Because as we're going to see in this video, this event only has 32 teams in it. And by the time you are getting down to these second picks of your top alliances, you're starting to look at teams where you're generally looking at tank drives, and sometimes they are not as mobile as you'd like for them to be. So there's obviously strategic defense you can play around kind of these bumps when you're going up against a bump-only robot like 9483, right? There's strategy involved in that. But it doesn't really matter what kind of strategy you have for stopping teams from going over the bump if 9483, and I'll kind of pause the video here, if 9483 can just outswerve you, if 9483 can just go wherever they want and speed past any defender that's going to be playing defense on them, it doesn't really matter that they're bump only. They can kind of do what they want. And given that at this event, a lot of these second picks were facing mechanical drive challenges, defense wound up not being as big of a factor as I think you'll see in other week 1, week 2s. Even, I would say, in comparison to week 0. So overall, 9483 was able to do really well being bump only, but I don't know how long that's going to hold. I don't know if this just works for week 1 and eventually you face problems, if it becomes a problem week 2, week 3, week 4, DCMP, Worlds. We don't really know because, in my opinion at least, I'm yet to see defense that's really consistent and really focused around these kind of defenses right here, these bumps and these trenches. But obviously, at least so far, the build a big hopper and build really anything on top of it, be it a turret, like 9483, or a mechanical advantage with a multi-wide, those architecture decisions haven't stopped teams so far from doing really well at events. Build quality at this point at least seems to be more important, arguably, than what archetype you wound up going with. And at this point, I guess we can kind of start the match and talk about what we see over the course of Finals 1, Finals 2. I'm only going to be talking about Finals 1 and Finals 2 in this video, but the kinds of things you see in these two Finals matches really can be extrapolated over the course of the entire event. The kinds of lessons you can learn here are takeaways you can, kind of utilize throughout the entirety of early competition, even later on, given how strong these two alliances are. So let's play the tape. So I don't want to skip through auto, but we see 9483 come over in auto. Everyone goes for these middle fuel, and they come back, and they start firing immediately. They're actually going to go to the human player station and take fuel and fire there. Meanwhile, Pars 6436 crosses over, crosses back, and then starts shooting fuel. So we can kind of pause this here, right? This is a lot of green lines. 9483 has done this sort of auto over the course of the entire event. If I wind back to the start of Autonomous phase, their auto is pretty much always run to this middle of the field, pick up a bunch of fuel somewhat slowly through here, come back across, and then output while going to this human player station. Essentially, they use their giant hopper and their very reliable shooting to put up something like 60-some, like maybe 65, fuel in auto alone through one pass for the middle and one human player station. this auto worked really well for them. In every single match, except for Finals 2, they wound up winning auto. And as we talked about earlier, that's just a huge advantage for your alliance. It gives you so much more time to set up for your offensive shift and get your V's fuel over here to your side of the field that you wind up being able to do very well in the match just from that alone. And as you can see for both alliances at the end of auto, there is not a lot of fuel ready to go. For this blue alliance here, for this alliance 2, they put up a really good auto score. They put up 65 points. Against any other alliance, this would be enough to win auto. But here it's not. And when we fast forward 10 seconds, and we wait for, actually they put up 66. I'm going to count down 10 seconds and wait till their own shift starts, which is going to be around now. And they're not ready, right? This is the moment where Blue Alliance is going for offensive shift. Two of her robots are not even on their side of the field yet. There's no fuel ready here. 9029's hopper isn't even is about half the way filled up, etc. This is not a slight on them. These are some amazing teams here, right? And to get robots of this quality going in week 1 is exceptionally hard. I don't want to understate that. But it just goes to show how brutal it is to get a shift ready in 10 seconds after auto. It's just not enough time. And it's going to put a major handicap on their ability to, keep up with this juggernaut of A1. And as we see this match play out, we're going to see that they are trying to do a passing strategy. They're trying to throw fuel back in here, but there's no one there to clean it up, right? Rembrandt has to fill up their hopper themselves. And by the time they get, if I can pause this video, by the time they get some fuel to play with, they're actually able to get some fuel over here to score. They have run through most of our offensive shift. There's 9 seconds left, and they've only tied A1. Right? They had spent so much time within their own shift setting up for that same shift that they are in a rough spot. And it's only going to get rougher as this match goes on. So they're doing the best they can, right? They're trying to take on a behemoth of an alliance. And we have Rembrandt shooting, and then we have NF shooting. And 11416 is trying to play some defense onto 9483. Right. So let the match play forward from here. And both these two blue robots, these two offensive machines, are going to start firing on the hub. And they're going to try to take the most advantage they can out of those seconds. One thing I want to point out that's going on at the same time is Alliance 1 is already firing. Right. We just moved from one shift to the other, and Alliance 1's been firing for like 4 or 5 seconds. This is because you can actually afford to fire a little bit early and have fuel still count. How early? Who knows, right? The exact amount of time your team can fire early and have fuel count is, I think a bit more of the Splatter secret. But these guys know their timings. They have a ton of fuel available on their side of the field because they could spend the entire time prepping, and they are going to let out a barrage over the course of these next 25 seconds. You might be wondering, where is the defense, right? 9483 is this amazing machine. Don't you want to defend them? And the answer is yes, they do. But 9483 is such a good machine that the picks that you have available, that second round of the draft, by the time you get to that point of the draft, aren't really capable of defending them, right? One of these, you're kind of in this catch-22 at this point, where you would like 11416 to be defending one of these two robots here. The problem is they have a tank drive, and it's going to be really hard for them to defend machines of this caliber that are that mobile. So it might be better if they push. If they push fuel over to their side of the field to try to make Alliance 2's offensive shifts better. But the problem is if you try to send 9029 or 4414 over, they're not spending the time they need to prep for their shift. These guys need to be filling up their hoppers with fuel. They need to be ready to go in 14 seconds, and the fuel over here is pretty sparse. So they can't really play defense either. But if you send nobody over to play defense, these guys are going to win the match on their own. And really, 94-83 or 64-36 could probably win this match on their own. They're that talented offensively. So really, no matter what you do, in terms of sending over 11-4-16, or sending over Rembrandt, or NF, or none, there's really no good answer to this predicament. And really, we could kind of stop this match here and then crown A1 as the likely winners. But we will continue going for this match and continue analyzing stuff. Because again, A2 is A2 for a reason. We're really strong. And we want to see kind of how they play this out. So A1 is absolutely free firing here. And we're going to keep free firing using all the fuel they can get their hands on. And in the meanwhile, blue is playing the strategy of don't try to defend A1 and instead try to get as much fuel onto their side of the field as possible. Right? Set up for their shift, and that begins now. This shift blue is a lot more ready for. 90-29 is still playing the cycling role, trying to get as much fuel over here so that Rembrandt can, put up a big offensive fight. And Rembrandt is trying to free fire. Right? And they're able to free fire because, in this case, Red Alliance is having 101-41 shuttle fuel this way. Right? And I think this is a smart play by Red. Right? If 44-81 is going to be the main offensive threat for blue, they have a turret. Right? They're a turreted machine. Trying to send 101-41 with a tank drive and try to stop 44-81 is probably going to be really hard. They're probably not going to get a ton of utility out of playing this defense. So don't have them play defense, right? Don't send them off to a role that's going to be hard for them to deliver value in. Instead, there's plenty of fuel over here. Just take this and push it over here. They have plenty of firepower on this alliance. 94-83, even alone, is enough firepower, but add 64-36 and you have, a king's treasure trove of firepower. So, if 101-41 can just shuttle fuel from here over to this alliance's side, that's pretty productive offense for them because it's so easy for 94-83 and 64-36 to convert that into points. So, don't waste your time trying to defend the turret. Just get as much fuel over here, and that kind of in turn denies fuel that 44-81 and 90-29 would really like to have. Right. This kind of fuel denial from turrets oftentimes is the best use of machines like 101-41 that can push around fuel pretty effectively, but might not have the drivetrain necessary to defend a turret. So we see a lot of this. They push fuel over to this side of the wall, and then they take the fuel and they ram it through the trench. That's the kind of approach that we wind up seeing with a lot of these second picks. And then you can see that this fuel that 101-41 pushed over is getting used very effectively by 94-83 and 64-36. This fuel pushing action winds up paying big dividends for Red Alliance. Now, one thing I will say is that if you're going to be the second pick, you need to make sure you can fit comfortably under the trench. 101-41 in this case is getting a little bit stuck there. They played this role very effectively so far, but this is where they hit a bit of a snag. So if you're going to play this fuel pushing role, make sure you have really good trench clearance. And if you're an early alliance picking for this fuel shuttling role, having a robot that can go under the trench is going to be very important. You could argue it's more important for second picks that are playing a more shuttling role. It's more important that they be able to go under the trench than your captain or your first pick. If this is the way the meta is going to play out. Kind of like what we saw from, again, week 0. So the match goes forward as you'd expect. 11-4-1-6 showcases why bump only could be a bit of a challenge later on. If we go back a little bit of time, they're positioning themselves opposite of this bump of 94-83, and eventually 94-83 is able to overpower them. They're able to kind of get them out of the way. But 11-4-16 they hold their ground for a decent amount of time with a tank drive, which is quite impressive. And if you go back another few seconds, I don't believe this ref is counting down a pin, right? This guy comes over, and there is no pin count happening because it's not a pin, right? They are not blocking both trenches simultaneously, right? They're not blocking, both bumps simultaneously. They're not blocking this and this. So even though 11416 is trying to stop, 9483 coming across this bump, that's not a foul. I think this is the kind of stuff that you could see happen to bumpily robots in the future. But again, it doesn't really matter because 9483 is that strong of a machine. Even if they were entirely stopped and they held out for another 20 seconds, they built up such a gigantic lead that it winds up not making too much of a difference. And at this point, we're in the end game. The match is kind of done. Alliance 1 has well surpassed the amount of points Alliance 2 can reasonably put up in the end game, even with all this fuel available and as good as they are. This match is just kind of done. And we wind up seeing a score of the 500s being put up as 6436 and 9483 just start pounding this hub. Right? They are just shooting a ton of fuel into here, and that's going to be that. Blue Alliance tries their hardest. Rembrandt's tries their hardest. They may have a really good throughput themselves, and a score that's good enough to beat almost any other Alliance this event, literally any other Alliance this event, 301, isn't enough to take on the 562 of Alliance 1. Right. This is the challenge that Blue Alliance, every other Alliance this event has faced going up against this A1 this entire event. It's just been that brutal. So that's what winds up happening in Finals 1, and Alliance 1 winds up taking it. We go all the way over to final scores, and we see that A1 winds up winning this one pretty decisively. They pick up 15 points of penalties for fun. Now, one thing I do want to point out as I transition over to Finals 2 is that climbs this event as a whole were pretty much completely useless. I didn't watch the entirety, so let's not skip too far into Finals 2. I did not watch the entirety of this event, right? I didn't watch the entirety of every single quals match. But one thing I did notice was that the climb rank point was never earned. No team earned the climb rank point at this event. No Alliance ever did. We had instances of the fuel ranking point being hit, mostly whenever 9483 was involved, but no climb. And you notice that in this first finals match, no one climbed. And in this finals 2 match, it's going to be the same deal. These structures are pretty much just obstacles at this point. And it's not hard to understand why when it comes to looking at these final scores, right? When you look at these playoff match scores, where would a climb have made a difference? Specifically a 10-point endgame climb. Well, nowhere. The only score that could have been possibly affected by climbs was match 6, right? Where if they got 2 endgame climbs, they would have won. If they got an auto climb, they would have tied. But obviously that comes with the sacrifice of fuel, right? You spend time climbing. Pretty much at no point in this event were climbs even remotely relevant. And teams that might have been able to climb, I don't know if 9483 even packed to climb. Why bother using it, right? If you're that offensively productive and you can put up 10 points in a flash into the hub, why bother going for the climb? All right, what does that accomplish for you? Nothing. And 9483 was able to dominate in this event without having to climb. The points values you get, even for an L3, 30 points, just wasn't deciding matches at this point. It just wasn't. So if your team, I'm not going to say that if your team was focused on getting a high climb, that it was a bad decision. But if you sacrificed a lot of your time, a lot of your development time, and a lot of space that could have been gone into your fuel game, if you spent that focusing on the climb, then you probably are not very happy with how this first event is played out and how week 0 played out. Because right now, at least, it appears to be very fuel focused, and I don't see how that changes easily as these events progress. What we might wind up seeing is the 50-point climb RP winds up staying 50 throughout the entirety of comp season. I would not be surprised if we go into Worlds and 50 is still the threshold for that climb RP. It's more likely, I think, at this point that the fuel rank points, both the 100 and the 360, wind up increasing than this 50 climb rank point. At least that's my take. So, without wasting too much of your time, let's go into these finals 2, right? And this finals 2 is going to be a story of reliability, because we're going to kick off this match, and your first thing you'll notice is that 64-36, their auto messed up. Normally 64-36's auto is they would go over here, they would intake fuel, come back, shoot, intake, and come back. It's this double swipe auto that served them well this entire event. They're that mobile. They don't have a big hopper, but they're very mobile. And this kind of allows them to make the most out of that archetype. And if they can dynamically pick up this fuel over here, it usually winds up with them winning auto, especially when paired with a team like 9483. But this time, their auto doesn't wind up working out. And you have 2 blue robots fighting over the fuel here, and only Overcharge, I think. I keep forgetting the name. Overcharge. I keep thinking Overclocked. And only 1 red robot fighting over the middle. The 9483 gets a decent but not great fill, and they're doing their normal auto of firing stuff off. They get less fuel than they probably wanted, and they don't get off their human player volley at the end of auto. This means Blue Alliance 2 ultimately wins auto here, and this is going to pay big dividends for them. Rembrandts gets to free fire any remaining fuel they have over this last 10 seconds, and they get plenty of time to set up their next offensive shift. Right? They are absolutely cooking here. And 64-36 shows a risk of being bump only. Right? They're going to, at the end of this autonomous phase, going to go over this bump, and they are going to land on fuel. They are going to land on fuel that 9029 winds up pushing there. They're going to get themselves beached. 9028 shoving fuel over here actually wound up being a pretty effective move on their part. I don't think it was intentional, but it wound up slowing down the Red Alliance considerably. Because the question is, how do you get 64-36 unbeached here? Right? They've been amazing this entire event, and they can't easily see the fuel that's over here. So them getting beached is, I'm not too concerned about it. But how do you get them unbeached, right? 9483 is your offensive threat at this point. They need to be prepping for a shift that has begun already. Like, they already are into their shift. And there's no fuel over here, right? They're in the same position Blue Alliance was in last time. And 1 and 141, they can shove fuel really effectively, but their tank drive is going to make it really difficult for them to push out 64-36 in the right angle to get them unbeached. Right? It's a struggle to figure out how is this robot going to get unbeached. And this is why I say that, teams will be gun shy of this bump if they can avoid it as the competition progresses. Because all it takes is one event like this, and you're crowd surfing on fuel, and you're spending a lot of time, right? Same thing we saw during week 0. As soon as this happens, people wind up going for trench. But it doesn't really matter, in this case for Red Alliance in a lot of cases, because they're that dominant, right? They haven't faced, another alliance that can put up 500 points a match. So we'll see this match progress, and Blue is getting their sweet time, with 90-29 smartly being able to kind of pass over and then Rembrandt's playing a bit more of a cleaning role. Red Alliance isn't firing on their goal until now, and they have 8 seconds left of their shift. So this is code red for the Red Alliance. Right. They are in a tough spot, and Blue has a big lead going into their first shift. So if I can stop drawing, we can let this match play forward a little bit. And 9483 is trying their best to be the offensive giant here. They're scoring, but now they can't score anymore because we're on Blue shift. And Blue is just peppering this hub. So 10141 is doing the smart thing. They're taking fuel, pushing it down here, shoving it over here, and creating something that 9483 can work with. And 9483 is having a hard time freeing 6436. And this is where Blue Alliance, I think, makes a really smart play. Right? 9483 knows they need to free up 6436. They're down 100 points. Could they come back from this? Yeah, they could. But it's going to be a lot easier to do this with 6436 coming online. But 11416 notices this. Right? They're thinking ahead. They have their thinking caps on. And they're like, well, if we can stop 9483 from freeing 6436 and burning their time, then we could potentially build up enough of a lead that we can survive whatever endgame onslaught 9483 puts up. Right. If we can get them to spend a lot of time and be unsuccessful freeing this robot, create this logjam over here, then we can buy ourselves enough time to win this match. So they're going to be hitting 9483 with whatever they have in order to try to keep them from freeing this robot. It's kind of like when you would have a robot stuck on the opposite side of the field during Reefscape, or maybe Beach Analogy, and you have another team trying to prevent a team from freeing the team beached on the algae. It's kind of like that, except replace algae with a ton of fuel. And getting beached on like a 45-degree angle with crowd surfing. So this match will continue playing out, and 11416 is trying to stop Istanbul from freeing their alliance partner. Istanbul, however, knows they can't keep doing this for forever, right? If they spend forever trying to free 6436 and they're unsuccessful, they will lose this match. So Istanbul has to get back on offense when their shift is available. They have to make these 15 seconds count. They have to try to close this gap. Thankfully, again, 10141 has been shoving fuel over to the side of the field the entire match. So they don't have a ton, but they have some fuel they can work with. And we're going to see why that's important right now, because, 9483 is just free firing here. They are trying their best to keep intaking fuel and keep firing. And I think this is probably why a turret is so incredibly valuable. They're able to go this way and go this way and go this way, all while shooting at the hub constantly. They don't have to stop while they're intaking fuel. Right? Whereas 9029, you watch them go through right here. They have to go in, get all their fuel, realign, and then fire. Right? They have to make that... They have to do these things separately, whereas 9483 is doing it in parallel. Now, again, they have a pretty high rate of fire because they have a fixed direction shooter, right? They have 2 fixed direction shooters. And that's able to help them overcome some of those challenges. And again, they're a great machine, don't get me wrong. But I think this is where a turret, when you have fuel scattered all over the place and you're late into a match, this is when a turret really comes to shine. If you're going to build a fixed direction shooter, you need to be prepared to try to take an advantage early on so that when you get into this later stage of the game, you have fuel building up over here and turrets free firing, you're able to hold on to that lead. You probably have to really focus on winning auto. That probably is going to be a prerequisite for a lot of these teams. But going back to the match, you'll see that Red's able to close the gap here, right? They actually take the lead briefly. 9483 is just that efficient shooting fuel, and they're shooting constantly, such that their score eventually overtakes Alliance 2's. And they wind up with a small lead coming into this final shift. And yet again, we see the importance of timing, right? 9483 is still firing after the whistle blows. Like, blue shift is on and they're still firing. They know that this hub will count fuel for a little bit longer than their shift would normally suggest. But they wind up overdoing it a little bit. And they're firing fuel now that's not going to count, right? These last fuel that are firing, they don't give them any score. And blue is going to be pounding this hub, right? They have a ton of fuel here, courtesy of 11416 and 9029 self-passing, and they are able to take a lead going into endgame. But the thing is, 9483 is already firing. And even though 10141 is currently beached, maybe beached for a bit, they have enough resources ready to go, and 6436 is freed themselves, right? So they can help out as well. Now, I think they may be having power issues because their shots aren't going as far as they want them to. They probably had to use power in order to get themselves unbeached here. Power, kind of like what we saw during week 0, maintaining your power is going to be critical in this year's game when you're often firing your intake, firing your indexer, firing your turret, and your drivetrain all simultaneously, right? You're going to have to do all of that. It also might be mechanical. I'm not on their team, so I don't know. But overall, we'd see it's pretty close coming into the home stretch, right? 9483 is going to go over. They're going to get one more shot of fuel, one more collection of fuel, and they're going to try to go win this thing, right? And they wind up being able to do just that. So if I let this video play, they will pick up all the fuel they can. They know their timings. They know how long it's going to take them to score that fuel that they pick up. And they're going to keep firing until the buzzer sounds. And ultimately, their rate of fire is going to win them this match. Their ability to just intake and outtake fuel so quickly, even if they're just one turret, right? They're not dual turret. They're not, they're not a multi-wide shooter. Their ability to shoot on the move and their ability to constantly shoot gives them more than enough balls per second to come back and win this match. And that is going to be the story of the Istanbul region. We're going to tally the scores. Red one's going to celebrate for good reason. Blue 2 should hold their heads up high because they almost took down this monster of an alliance and played some pretty good strategy alongside it. But ultimately, Red is going to take this thing. We're going to count up the scores, and Red Alliance is going to win this 311 to 275. That being said, I think Blue did what they needed to do here, right? If we go back into this match, they had 11416 trying to defend 9483 when the opportunity presents itself, otherwise shuttling fuel. 11141 shuttling fuel most of the time. Rembrandts and NF trying to do their best to get fuel into a position to score, then scoring it. Right. And 9483 striking a balance between trying to free their alliance partner and putting up enough offense to win this match. This, despite the difficulties these alliances faced, were pretty well played. And I think if you're going to look to matches in this event to take home with you as advice for week 1, week 2, it's probably going to be these finals matches. But again, going back to the start of this video, I hesitate to take too much away from this. For one, because 9483 is probably a better top robot than you will see at almost any event. If this isn't 9483 here, then you're looking at an alliance of probably 6436 plus one of these two machines over here being Alliance 1. And this event winds up being, I think, considerably closer. Most of events you'll attend, you're not going to have a robot of this caliber out there. And I think you're also, at a lot of events, going to have a situation where your second pick still has swerve, right? Where maybe the idea of playing defense against one of these top robots winds up being significantly more attractive than what we see here, because you're not trying to defend a team like 9483, and because your second pick winds up being a swerve machine. But either way, I think this can be a set of insights that are useful to get from week 1. In short, if I had to condense my insights into kind of 1 or 2 minutes of talking, it's shoving winds up being a pretty good strategy when you know you can't defend someone because turret, Having a big hopper and bump only is working so far, but there are severe risks with being a bump team, with landing on fuel, and you have to be ready to deal with that. Losing auto is still really bad. It takes a great team to overcome losing auto. And these walls are your friends. Shoving up against these walls and then pushing out is going to be a good strategy for getting fuel over and getting fuel into the goal. And I guess finally, well, two other things. Climbing, not really high value. And turrets, the ability to shoot on the move, really high value. So that's what I would take away from week 1. From at least the Istanbul regional. We'll be seeing a lot of these teams again. For all these top teams, and many others toward the top of this list, going to the Blue Alliance, going to results. We'll see them again at Worlds. We'll see 9483 again in week 5. But we will see Rembrandts in their machine. Again, really good job by them, I believe, in week 2. Yeah, they'll be going up to week 2. So either way, that's my take, my kind of immediate reaction to Finals 1 and Finals 2 at Turkey. Thank you so much for watching, and peace.